Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Taking a little detour from the MR2 and the Cobra, and I'm going to do some work on the Gladiator in this video. I'm going to be going off-roading again soon, and I want to add a lift kit before I start going back out on the trails. So what I ended up doing is I got rough country 2.5 inch front spacers, and then I got the Daystar 0.75 rear spacers. So that should be basically a leveling kit to get rid of the rake that it has, as well as give me a little bit more clearance. So I'm gonna go ahead, get started on the front, and let's get this going. All right, so first thing with doing this install is gonna be getting the thing up in the air, obviously. I already loosened the lugs on all the wheels. I'm gonna get this thing jacked up, put some jack stands under the frame, get the wheels off, and then I can start loosening up everything. I've got the instructions for it, and they're online, pretty easy, pretty straightforward install for the front end. I'm definitely going to loosen up every control arm mounting bolt as well as the trailing arm to make sure that when it's lifted, the bushings will not be in bind. So that's one thing you want to do to make sure that you don't have any death wobble or anything in the future. Make sure to reset basically the bushings once everything's put back together. So I'm going to get this thing up in the air and get to work. All right, update time for anybody who's going to try and do this job themselves. So try as I may on the control arms, I don't have this thing far enough up in the air to really get those things loose. I'm going to need to put a monster breaker bar on them. They're pretty tight. I couldn't get to any of them. Tried air gun and everything, didn't do it. So I just am proceeding with doing the actual install of the lift kit. If I notice any issues when I'm driving, I'll go ahead and put this thing up higher in the air and try again to loosen them up and re-index the bushings on the control arms. But everything is articulating just fine right now, so I'm not really that worried about it. So we'll see. Just wanted to give an update there. As far as everything else goes, if you look, you'll see I already have this spacer in on this side, as well as the bump stop loosely in place. Instead of doing what their instructions say and doing like the whole axle at once, I'm just doing it side by side. So it's really pretty straightforward. I unhooked this sway bar end link, undid the bolt and nut for this shock once I had a jack underneath it, and I ended up having to use two jacks because this has got a lower reach to get this thing low enough to get everything in. One thing I had to do is on the factory isolator, there's two nubs sticking off of it, I think, to center it up here in the actual factory perch. Those do not fit into the spacer block, so I had to nib those off with a pair of side cutters. And then I got it down low enough. I unhooked the brake bracket there, as well as undid the bolt there to make sure I had enough play, and I had just enough to get it down far enough where I could wrestle the spring into place, and then just wedged the bump stop in between two coils, and then the bolt just goes through the top, and then there's a flange nut on the bottom underneath the perch. So still have to tighten that, obviously, but yeah, that's basically what you have to do. So now I'm going to install the brackets, the adapter bracket for the shock on the mount, and then get everything in place for the shock, and then it's just buttoning stuff up and then get over to the other side. All right, I've got the shock adapter in there. Everything is torqued to spec. So this is basically where it is going to end up, minus the sway bar end links. I still have to do those, but I'm going to go ahead and get the other side done first. So walking over, I've actually already started taking the other side apart. So you can see here's the factory spring isolator. Those are the two little nubs I was talking about. They have to be cut off. And then you can see I've got the spring laying there. The top's facing me. Just kind of had to angle it inward. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead. You can see what I had to loosen. I just loosened the brake bracket there. There's plenty of slack and all the other stuff, as you can see. It's nothing's tensioned or anything like that. So, and then obviously I have to take the shock out of the bracket. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the nibs off of that bushing or isolator, get the new spacer in there, get the bump stop ready to put in, and get this thing assembled. All right, time for an update. As you can see, got the isolators put in place. Everything is where it's supposed to be. I've got the bump stops loosely in place. These ones are much more of a chore because you have very limited access to the underside on the front, because you've got the trailing arm and steering brackets there. Other side was a lot easier. And then I've got the new shock bracket and everything loosely in place, so I just need to get that torque down. So I'm going to go ahead, start torquing everything, and get this all finalized as far as the springs and spacers go. All right, and one other quick add. When I had everything tightened, I noticed this bracket here, the way it was from the factory, these were like pretty tight. So I did on both sides bend this here upward, just kind of grabbed it right here and just pulled up and back just to give myself some slack. So now there's slack again in those lines. So make sure you do that on both sides to make sure you're not pulling too hard on any brake lines or wiring. All right, everything is torqued, so this is how it is going to be. You know, like I said, got enough slack on this side as well. Now that I went and bent that bracket upward. So yeah, nothing's tight, everything looks pretty, or nothing's like got tension on it. All the lines and everything look pretty good underneath. So all that is left is doing the sway bar links, because the kit comes with new links, so I have to get those installed. And then I do have to retorque the trailing arm. It said to loosen and remove it. I never even bothered removing it. I loosened it, but I'll just have to tighten that back up. So I'm gonna go ahead and get to work on sway bar links. All right, and new sway bar end links are in. Everything's torqued. So both sides are done as far as that goes. As you can see there, so everything is bolted in as far as the kit goes. I just need to torque the cross arm and then check the steering wheel. I'll probably have to make an adjustment on the steering link just to center the steering wheel again. So I'm gonna go ahead and get to work on that. All right, well here we are back on the ground. Wheels are torqued. So you can see this again, this is front only. Still have to do the rear. I'm just out of time today, so that will be on tomorrow's to-do list. Definitely a little taller in the front. I mean, it's hard to tell just because of the slope of my driveway, but you can see the gaps, and yeah, front's definitely up over the rear. But yeah, I got the 3/4 inch spacers to put in the rear, and that is on tomorrow's to-do list. But yeah, pretty happy with that gap. Looks a little burlier, so it's gonna look even better when I get some bigger tires on it down the road. But yeah, pretty happy at this point. I do still need to take it around the block real quick, see where the steering wheel sits. Apologize, there's an airplane flying overhead right now. Hopefully you can hear me. But yeah, that's the last thing I'll need to do as far as the front goes, is just take it for a quick around the block, see where the steering wheel ends up, if I have to adjust it or not. I mean, I'm guessing I will, since I just added 2.5 inches of height to the front end. But yeah, we'll see where we end up. All right, next day, time to get to work on the rear. Little update, I did take it out for a few drives last night just to see how things handled and whatnot, and check the steering. Surprisingly, the steering is fine. It's, you know, if it's off like a half a degree. It's barely pitched the steering wheel to the left. So I'll probably just put a tiny little bit of out turn in the tie link, but it's gonna be minimal. It really doesn't need much. So I'll do that just to be safe. But first thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and get the rear wheels off, get it up on jack stands, and then I can start doing the spacers in the back. According to the instructions, you're supposed to do all the work on one side then the other. To me, that doesn't make sense, because when you disconnect the sway bar end link and then put the spacer in, it's gonna be a lot harder to reconnect it if the other side is at a different height. So I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect things on one side, get the spacer in, disconnect things on the other side, get the spacer in, and then I'll do the sway bars on both sides last. That is the plan, so I'm not fighting the torsion of the sway bar trying to get it in with two different height rear lengths. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get the wheels off and get this thing up on jack stands. All right, so we are up in the air on jack stands. I already have the sway bar link out on this side. Top one's easier than the bottom, because the top one just screws into a welded nut to the frame versus having to deal with the whole Allen head on the lower one. So my recommendation, take out the top one. And then I already have the sway bar bolt loose, the nuts off. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put the jack under this side, take the tension off, get that bolt out, and then I drop it down this side and slide that little spacer underneath the spring on the bottom perch. All right, update time. I ended up disconnecting on both sides, both the sway bar and the shock. They're loose because when I had this side undone, pushing down on it, I couldn't get the old spring out. It just didn't have enough give. So once I loosened up the other side, I was able to really wrench down on it and get the old spring out. In order to get the new spring in, I did have to use a pry bar. It does not want to move much, so you will have to use some tools and use some leverage just to get things into place. So, but you can see the isolator is in, or the spacer is in on this side. I am going to go ahead and get the other side done next. All right, well, easy enough. Just use a pry bar to pop it out, and then get the spring out at kind of an angle. Clean off the pad, get the puck in place on the pad, and then just use the pry bar to leverage the spring on top of it, and you're good to go. Pops right into place. I made sure there's on the top of each spring perch, the isolator, there is one little plastic nub that needs to sit into a hole just for indexing it, so make sure you get that right and you're not fighting that. But yeah, as you can see, both shock bolts and nuts are loosely attached, and both sway bar links are back in place loosely attached. So just need to go ahead and torque everything down, and that will be it for the rear. That is way easier than the front. So I'm going to go ahead and get that all taken care of, and then we can get the tires back on this thing and see where the final stance sits. All right, well, here we are. It is back on the ground. Everything's tightened up, and here is the final end point as far as how the gaps are going to be. Pretty happy. It's noticeably taller, but not terrible. So it's still doable as far as driving daily. Definitely have some room for some bigger tires now, so that is nice. I definitely want to put 35s on it in the future. I don't know if I'll go to 37s. I'll most likely just be 35 since this is my daily driver. So next thing on the list, I just need to crawl under the front end and give it a little bit extra in the steering department. Alright, so here's what I was talking about. This is the steering link. So basically all I'm going to do is loosen up that collar there and then just turn this out ever so slightly. Like I said, it doesn't need much. It might be a half a turn, maybe 3/4 of a turn. I don't think it's not going to be a huge amount that I'm going to need to move it, because like I said, the steering wheel is still pretty much dead center. Just want to move it the ever so slight bit that it is off, because I think it is ever so slightly canted to the left, but it's barely noticeable. It is pretty much centered when you're driving. You just kind of feel the slight difference when you hit a bump in the road, which way it shimmies and whatnot. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen that up and just give it a little bit of turn. All right, all done. I don't know if you can see, but you can see there's like one clean thread in there. So yeah, I mean, I just pushed it out about one thread. It was pretty minimal, so maybe like half a turn, and then retighten everything. So we should be good there. It should be centered. I did go back and forth with the steering wheel, and from eyeball, it looks like everything's right. So I believe that is going to be it as far as this job goes. All right, and on that note, I think it is time to call this a video. Pretty happy with how it turned out. It's definitely got a little more space in both wheel wells. I'll go out, drive it, see how it is. I'll get it up on the highway, check it at highway speed, make sure there's no wobble or anything, because I know that there is the potential for that. If I do encounter anything, I'll go ahead and get this thing higher up in the air and be able to loosen up the lower control arms and the upper control arms, recenter the bushings. But I don't anticipate anything. I mean, it seemed like everything was pretty free moving when I was going up and down, at least in the front. The rear did seem to be a little more bound up, but there was also a minimal change in the rear, and that's really not going to cause any death wobble. It's mostly the front, and the front was pretty compliant as far as moving the axle goes, so not too worried about it. That being said, I think this is time to call it a video. If you are enjoying what you're seeing, if you learned something, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell. There will be more coming up on the Gladiator. I do have some other stuff I want to do to it, and I will be taking it off-roading. Hopefully, next weekend I'll be going out, so we will see. But yeah, thank you for watching, and have a great day.